So we're in the middle of recording and building a custom Kontakt instrument. This is part 2, where we start getting into the nitty-gritty details. One thing I should definitely mention is this isn't 100% accurate as to how I normally do it here in the studio. Because normally what I would have is some outboard patched in ahead of time. I would be going probably through a distressor and then through one of these API EQs, and then that would be tracking basically straight into Pro Tools. But something that I do kind of no matter what. Here's my mix console, and these are my inputs. So the nice thing about Cubase is you can specify like things you want to have on your inputs as you're recording. It's kind of the equivalent of the UAD Unison technology, I think, is how it works. I mean, basically. So I have this input. I've got a low cut here, just because I didn't need anything low from the cello, and why worry about it? And then I have an instance of Soothe that is literally just set to Unity, and this is like how I have the default saved instance as soon as it pulls up. So when I was playing the cello, it was basically doing any soothing, which probably was a lot of needing soothing up here because it was so high and nasty. And it just gives me less work to do on the back end once everything's recorded into the computer. So here we have our takes. And we'll just do quiet and loud. So we got quiet and we've got loud. So let's listen to the quiet. I remember making that one intentionally sharp. And let's listen to the loud. All right, we got 4 good performances of each. So I'm just going to go and cut these up real quick and get everything on its own track, and then we'll go from there. So now I've got all 4 performances of the 2 articulations all lined up, and we're going to take a listen to them in Cubase and see if there's anything that really needs to be done. A lot of times with simple instruments like this, it's a lot easier just to throw things in Kontakt and sort of experiment with them a little bit and then see what you need to do kind of again, because building the instrument is not that hard. So let me mute these 4. All right, here's our quiet with all 4 on top of each other. That's just beautiful. Now, one interesting thing to note here, and this is just something else I've picked up from recording myself doing this all the time. First of all, it's really hard to play quiet and not make the string, and consistently, like not make the string squawk, or you get too close to the end of the bow, it starts getting heavier and it digs in a little more. That's why a lot of that quiet stuff that I do. Can we get the whole bow? There we go. Basically is from here to here. Because as soon as you start bowing over here, it gets heavier. There's a balance point, right? Like right about there. There's a balance point for the bow. Once it gets past that, it starts getting harder to stay quiet and be consistent. Probably not as important if you're in a group of 10 cellos, but when you're playing by yourself under a microscope, every little bit stands out. So I was trying to be really quiet, and I was trying to make the bow change as imperceptible as I could, but I wasn't too concerned about it because I knew there were 3 other Jasons that were going to be doing a bow change at a different time, because each time I did a separate pass, I made sure to bow differently, especially in the beginning. Maybe it's a little slower, maybe it's a little faster. So let's listen to that again. Like here's the first one. By itself. All right, we can see where the bow changes are. Those are fairly close, but everything else, it kind of randomizes out. Let's listen to all of them again, now with the waveform blown up, so you can see where the bow changes are. And you have to keep in mind, this is also completely dry. We're going to have reverb on it. Eventually, I like having reverb basically not baked into the samples. I like to be able to put the reverb as an insert in Kontakt because I like to have that control. Maybe I want it to be super up close and sort of dry and in your face, or maybe I want it to sound like an ensemble of cellos on a scoring stage. That way, I can change it according to how I want, and if it ends up going in the template, I still have control over the reverb, even if it's on one of the slaves. All right, so let's mute that and give a listen to the loud one. Which I'm going to pull the stereo master down because I don't want to kill us. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought it would sound like. Now, another important thing to note is everything's in mono right now. So the microphone is, you know, at an angle. Here's the cello. The mic's coming in at an angle, and all 4 recordings are that way. Now, one thing that I did on this last game I was working on where I wanted it to sound like a cello section doing like rock guitar chords, like power chords, and I played guitar over it. I actually just took my chair, and for each take, I pivoted the chair basically around the microphone so that I was literally in a different position every time. But then sometimes I would forget to move, so I just end up panning it in the computer afterwards. I think you get a slightly different response when you're off axis from the microphone, a different way. The capsule on the Telefunken is a hypercardioid, so it's really tight. So even a 6-inch shift can kind of make a big difference. But in this case, we're just going to go with straight up panning. So let's take a listen again to the cellos. Here's our mixing board. Here are our 4 channels. Straight up. Now, a lot of times for effects like this, it's not necessarily like they sound like cellos. It's just sort of a high string sound. What I would probably do is do something fairly general like this. I'm just using my controller because I like not mousing around too much. Spread them out a little bit and color them pink, of course. Maybe something like that. For this, I like to use my scope so I can get an idea of what the stereo signal looks like. So I think that's spread out enough where they're not all in one teeny tiny spot, but it's not so spread that if I will end up panning it afterwards with the reverb, which I probably will end up doing, it's not going to sound unnatural. So it's, you know, if this is the stereo spectrum, it's kind of like here. And then this way I can pan it back and forth and kind of still make it sound like a cohesive element. If I was going for a super specific effect, like if I were actually recording this as opposed to making a sample instrument, I would probably do extreme panning and maybe even base my like articulations and how I play based on that panning. Something super hard left, something super hard right. Include the reverbs and that sort of panning as well. But since this is general, we're going to stick with this nice sort of spread. So the next step is just balance. We've already done our panning, and now it's just a matter of evening out this performance a little bit. I'm not going to do any compression, like I mentioned. What I am going to do is just normalize these to, let's say, -6. That's probably loud enough. And then we'll normalize these to like maybe -12. I've got a key command that pulls up the direct offline processing. So that way we've got a little bit of extra gain all around. These high sounds don't need a lot because they will cut through in a heartbeat. So we've got everything panned and we've got everything normalized, but we're still in the original channel essentially. So I'm going to go ahead and print all of this so everything's panned accordingly, built into the sample. Now, of course, it's different in every DAW, but in Cubase, all I'm really going to do is just choose render. And that way, just channel settings, it's going to print stereo files for me. Unfortunately, I did not realize at the time I recorded this, when I was bouncing my original mono files to stereo with this panning, they bounced, but they kept the panning on the channel itself and did not print it to the audio. This was just my mistake because when I did it, I chose channel settings, and I think I simply assumed that it would render the pan. It did not. You need to choose complete signal path if you want it to render the panning to the actual audio file and not simply carry it over in the channel strip itself. Fortunately, there's an easy way to fix this in Kontakt. You click on the wrench and choose Mapping Editor and List View. Here are our 8 samples, and if you click on each one, you can have pan control. What I've done is I've set 2 to the extreme left and right. That's piano 1, piano 2's extreme right, piano 3 kind of in the middle, left and right. So when you play the sample, you're going to hear it back in stereo in Kontakt. Unfortunately, for the rest of this video, all of the samples in Kontakt are going to be playing back in mono. But we're just going to have to deal with that, and in the next video, for the examples of how I like to use these kinds of sounds, we will be back in glorified stereo. That will be panned accordingly. So if I just solo this first one, I'm going to quickly go down the list and we can see the meter over here. Left. And I'm not going to kill us with the loud ones. So now we have our stereo audio files and they've been printed. Just going to name them real quickly so we don't lose our minds in Kontakt. Okay, so we're back. I've got everything named, and at least in Cubase, you've got these kind of file and descriptions. I just renamed both of them. So this way, if I look in the audio files folder, it's exactly what they're named, and I know what I'm getting myself into when I create Kontakt. That's it for now. See you next time when we wrap this thing up and see how it really sounds.